If you're new to the show, I want you to know that I believe that we maximize our health potential when we align our lives more fully with God's natural design for spirit, mind, and body. And that encompasses a lot. But what we're going to be talking about today is our thought lives and how we process our emotional intelligence and how we handle our emotions in a positive way, especially in these midlife years. So it's an important part of really maximizing who we are created to be, is not being handicapped by emotions that plague us and keep us from living the full life that we're supposed to be living.
Words are made to feed your soul. And so like food, be particularly generous and thoughtful about the words you choose to feed yourself each day and each moment.
Welcome to the Natural Health Matters podcast, where it's all about maximizing your health potential so that you can look and feel your best at any age. I'm your host, David Sandstrom, naturopathic doctor and biblical health coach, and this is episode number 113. Today we have on the show Caroline Brown. Caroline is a mompreneur living in London. She's an author, an emotional wellness coach, and is a clinical trauma professional. She offers individual and group coaching services. Caroline holds a BA in social work and a master's in forensic psychology, and she hosts the Crazy Over 40s Life podcast. Caroline, welcome to Natural Health Matters.
Thank you so much, David, for having me on your podcast. I'm really excited to be here and to obviously share what I know with your listeners.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. Caroline, you had me on your show a couple of months ago, and we had the holidays and took a little break, but I'm glad to get together with you again. It's always a pleasure talking with you.
It's always nice to kind of reconnect, isn't it? And
yes,
I think what's really important in the podcasting world is to kind of build on your network and kind of don't make it a one-man kind of a one-time experience. It's good to build on it, isn't it?
Yeah. Podcasting can be a little bit of a lonely business when you're in the studio by yourself.
Oh, God, yes, definitely. I need a life.
So tell the Natural Nation what it is that you do today.
Okay, so as you mentioned before, I do coaching. I coach the over 40s. That is a separate part to the work that I do also. I'm an integrative therapist, and I do specialize in trauma work and those who are neurodiverse as well. So yes, I work in private practice, but as I said, I'm here to kind of promote the over 40s. I think we are the forgotten kind of developmental stage. It does go up all the way up to 60. So when I say over 40s, anyone over 40, essentially. It's a stage
I'm glad it goes to 60 because I just turned 60 a couple months ago.
It goes, yes, because I'm going on the Ericsson. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yay! Yeah. I'm glad to be a part of all this for you. Oh, wonderful. Yeah, I mean, like Ericsson said, a famous psychologist, it goes all the way up to 60 plus. So this is an important stage because it's a stage where we want to continue to move through life. Stagnation is not really healthy for us, and that's what creates the crazy over 40s or the midlife crisis, as I said. Or the rebirth of our adolescence. That's how I like to describe it. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Well, if you're new to the show, I want you to know that I believe that we maximize our health potential when we align our lives more fully with God's natural design for spirit, mind, and body. And that encompasses a lot. But what we're going to be talking about today is our thought lives and how we process our emotional intelligence and how we handle our emotions in a positive way, especially in these midlife years. So it's an important part of really maximizing who we are created to be, is not being handicapped by emotions that plague us and keep us from living the full life that we're supposed to be living. So, Caroline, was there an event in your life that led you into this line of work, or did you have any defining moments that brought you to where you are today?
Good question. Well, my beginnings of my career was in social work. So I've also, as you mentioned, I have a master's and I also have therapeutic qualifications as well in therapy, counselling work. So yes, all my life, it's always been dedicated to emotional wellness and being a mum and being a wife at one point in my life too.
Uh-huh.
also encouraged me to be emotionally aware. I had to be. But one thing that I must say is that sometimes we do neglect ourselves. You know, we have different roles in our life. You know, as we go through the stages of life, we have different roles and we acquire it each time. And sometimes we drop roles as well. And that needs adjusting as well. And so with that, we need to adjust our emotional wellness. And it's quite interesting to talk about spiritual beliefs and what does that all mean. Um, I believe the midlife crisis comes into question, or we kind of wrestle with our over 40s, is when we ask questions about that. What are our spiritual beliefs? What are we passionate about? What are our values? Those are the things I feel that holds us steady. It steadies our core. And that helps us with our energy too, to navigate through life.
Yeah. Well, I've heard it said, and I've repeated this in the past, but
Right.
you've reached midlife when you stop looking at life as how many years you have behind you, but you look
Mm,
at it as how many years you have left. Would you
true.
agree with that statement?
Yeah, I do agree. The very important thing with midlife is that we can do all over again. You know, once we get to
Hmm.
40, we can have it. We live in a lot longer, thanks to technology, medical advancement, healthy eating. Well, you know, we can choose what we eat, don't we? Genetics is a huge part to play in it as well. I think we're more
Sure.
aware of what it takes to keep our body healthy and our mind and spirituality and well.
Right.
But
Right.
yeah, absolutely, I do agree with that.
Of course, it's my contention that we have a mind-body connection. It's well documented in the medical literature that
Hmm.
what the thoughts and the beliefs that we hold and the thoughts that we choose to ruminate on throughout the day, they will have an impact on our physical well-being and our vitality as well.
Mm,
So that's what I want to dive into today. Now, I know you've got a book,
I
and it's
do.
called, let's see, it's called The Five-Step Challenge to Understanding the Crazy Over 40s Life.
There we go.
So, yeah, let's see it. Okay,
Right.
fantastic.
Yeah, it's a book that I created because I, going through my over 40s, still am obviously. I wanted something to kind of help me through it, and I wanted something I can kind of refer to very quickly. And so I started to put notes together, and before I knew it, I actually created a very simple, but back to basics kind of books, really. Things that we overlook in day to day life. And I felt this was very important. I mean, there are 5 steps. There are more other chapters in the book, but it's fundamentally around 5 steps. And one of them is honor how I feel. And it's about getting over your crazy over 40s life fear. You know, we all have a fear of going into that next step of our development. You know, I call it the rebirth of our adolescence. We get to that state, and as I mentioned before, the questions that we tend to ask ourselves is, what are we passionate about? What are our values? Um, Spiritual beliefs. We question these things because up until then, all we have acquired may not have been all of ours. You know, whether it's our families, values, spiritual beliefs, passions that we've inherited from family members, societal expectations, all those things. And also we have roles outside of the home. So if you're a banker, say, some of your beliefs or values may be centered around money, perhaps. And maybe that you've inherited an expectation where you're going to medicine. But then your kind of values is centered around creativity, which is very different. But you're
Mhm.
going through these expectations and picking up the baton of someone else's values and beliefs just to make them happy. But then you get to a certain point in your life where all these things are questioned and things fall apart quite quickly. And that's what I talk about, kind of confronting your fear, the fear to accept that things are just not going right. Fear, talking about the fear of understanding that fear shouldn't stop you from kind of being honest and authentic about your journey. It's very important to be authentic about your journey, or try to kind of suppress some of the things that you want to do and say, if this is the time to do it, this is the time to do it. I can't see any other time to do it, to be honest. Over
Yeah.
40 is a good benchmark. Yeah.
So, how would you advise somebody who is at that point in their life? Let's say there's a mid to late 40s mom listening, and she's raised her kids, and they're going to be empty nesters in a few years, and she's asking herself some of those big questions. What does that process look like, and how could you encourage that person to really figure out solid answers to those big life questions?
Yeah, thank you for asking me that. Because I was that person. Yeah, I was in that role. As I said, mentioned, I'm now divorced. I have 2 children, and I did go through that process. The process of trying to find out exactly what is your role, and some people are afraid to kind of say, well, I have a role outside of what I'm doing, which is the role of taking care of myself. And sometimes it may be seen to be quite selfish, some of the things that someone wants to do. So the process looks like this. Think about what makes you happy. What makes you happy? So if you're kind of a creative, you like writing, say, just for instance, you like to write, and you say, well, I can't write. I don't have that much time to write. I mean, I'm so busy doing what I'm doing. But then you have to ask yourself this question, does it make you happy? What harm is it doing? If the question is around someone else's expectations, or you're taking away from the time from them, then you've got to ask, well, but what time do I have for myself? I dedicate most of my time to the family. Ask what makes you the most happiest. And if you don't know the answer to that, then I'll go back to this. What are your values? What are your values? What are your beliefs?
As a follower of Jesus Christ, it's my contention that we experience more happiness and more lasting joy when we do things God's way, because He has our best interest in mind, and He knows us better than anybody. He probably knows us even better than we know ourselves, and He even knows the future. So it's kind of like having a relationship with God is kind of like having a jungle safari guide in life. And we would do well on a jungle safari to stick near to our guide, because he knows the way. He knows where the snakes are. He knows where the dangerous areas are, the cliffs, and helps us stay away from danger. Well, in the same way, when we do things God's way, when He gives us an instruction and we follow that, it's for our benefit. And if He gives us a prohibition or an admonition that says, avoid something, it's for our protection. So it would be my contention that that's how we experience maximum joy. And of course, if our spirit is right, then our desires are going to line up with God's desires, even though it might not feel like it at the moment. In the long run, we'll never regret doing things God's way. So, and I think we're saying the same thing, Caroline, but with different words. So, talk to that a little bit in your book about finding true joy and lasting happiness.
Mm-hmm. Well, I talk about honor how you feel, and I talk about that in the broadest sense. I talk about sort of the things that we suppress because of shame, guilt, criticism, all the things that allow us to become authentic. And as what you're referring to is that sometimes we do need some guidance, and I think that we kind of lose our way when we don't listen to the inner voice. Really, it gets hidden, it gets suppressed, it gets pushed down, because we're too worried about what other people think, what's expected from us. And I do believe that there is something bigger than us that we need to lean into. And whatever that may be, people may not be religious, but if you feel a spiritual kind of belief or an energy, some people are drawn to energy, and that's important too, to lean into that when things just don't feel right. Sometimes it is good to sit back and find peace and surround yourself with silence at times. Silence is a good place to be, for you to gather your thoughts. And I feel all those things are really important. And
Hmm.
I am a spiritual person. I am a Christian, but over the time, that has been questioned for myself a little bit. So
Yeah.
I describe myself as being more spiritual
Hmm.
than being religious. But I believe that people should lean into something bigger, or higher purpose, or
Yeah.
a higher
Of course.
energy. Yeah.
Yeah, not everybody listening is going to have the same type of beliefs that I do, or the
Mm,
the same type of faith in God. But I think we
yeah,
can all agree that there is something outside of ourselves. There is a higher power out there in the
yes,
universe
I
that
do.
is out there to guide us and direct us. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. Is I think we all have a built-in desire to be a part of something larger than ourselves. There's a lot of research being done and a lot in the published medical literature about the health benefits of benevolence, of
Mm,
serving other people, of
right.
giving, donating your money and your time. It's actually good for your health, and of course, the Bible says it's more blessed to give than to receive. And
Mm,
it's refreshing to me to see modern science catching up with what the Bible has been teaching for thousands of years. So it kind of goes full circle back to what I was saying. When we do
right.
things God's way, in the short run, it might feel like pain. It might feel like limits. It might feel like restrictions, short leash. But in the long run, we're gonna be happy with those choices.
Yes, and also I believe that from giving can allow you to see the kindness in being having self-compassion. So I think
Hmm.
that's one of the things that we don't do enough is seeing how others get a joy from people being kind and giving time and spending a moment from moment to moment, and just being there, just being present. Sometimes things don't need to be said, just time.
Right?
And I think that sometimes that we don't do that for ourselves. And that's one of the other things I like to kind of shout about, if I can say that, is self-awareness includes that. It's very important to nurture and nourish your mind, to be
Yes.
compassionate, self-compassionate. And what does that actually mean? Because some of the messages that we've been taught is that sometimes that when you are self-compassionate, you're kind of being self-absorbed or selfish. And I think we need to kind of take that out a little bit, the selfish part, or kind of look at it and kind of turn it around a little bit. And it's
I totally
okay,
agree.
totally be good to that.
Yeah.
Because you're not good, if you're not good for yourself, you're not good to anyone else.
Well, I spent 35 years as a professional airline pilot, and I know the pre-flight briefing well, and it
Mm,
says in the event of an unexpected change in cabin pressure, oxygen mass above your head will drop. If you're traveling
mm,
with a child or someone who needs assistance, put on your mask first and then assist the child. And the
yes.
reason for those instructions is you're of no use to the child if you're unconscious. Right?
Absolutely.
And the same thing is true in life. If we are spent emotionally, if we have no energy, and we're carrying around 75 extra pounds of weight and we're exhausted at the end of the day,
Mm,
we're not going to be much use to those that we love. The people that we love, we're going to have a hard time serving, even though we have a heart's desire to serve them. We're too busy dealing with our own issues, and by necessity, become a little more self-absorbed with dealing with this baggage that we're carrying, and we have
mm,
less margin to serve others with. And of
mm,
course, relationships are a big part of the health equation, right? We want, if there's all kinds of research coming out, and especially here post COVID, that
mm.
social isolation and relational disconnect is extraordinarily bad for our health. So we need to work on relationships, don't we?
We do, definitely. And that's the other journey in my book, relationships with me and myself and I discussed that and the importance of having a wonderful relationship with yourself. And just go back to what you said, you're talking about, making sure you're there for yourself so you're there for others. There's something called compassionate fatigue, compassion fatigue.
Hmm.
And some people are almost over compassionate to others, in hope somehow it kind of will self soothe them. Some people journey through life wanted to do well for others, to avoid or to somehow address, to cleanse, to purify their own journey. You know, and so the motive behind that becomes quite dishonest, really, in many ways, because the reasons why you're doing it. So having a relationship with yourself is very important. Understanding, you know, who are you? What do you want to become? You know, who do you see yourself as? What are your values?
Mm-hmm. You know, I think what you're talking about here, Caroline, is being genuine. Be genuine with yourself. Absolutely. Starts with yourself first, right? Yeah. And then, of course, genuine with others. But one of the things that gets in the way, and you mentioned it earlier, is childhood trauma.
Yes.
You know, events, traumatic events that happen to us in childhood that cause scars and woundedness. And a young child, particularly 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, they don't have the capacity, the emotional capacity to process a lot of life's difficult situations, you know, a parent leaving, or maybe someone in the family dying, or, you know, or it might be bullying at school. You know, there's a lot of ways this can happen. And basically the bottom line is being mistreated, not being loved the way we deserve to be loved as a young person. We can make some false conclusions about the way the world works and about our position in the world. And we can take those beliefs into adulthood, and it can really significantly impact our ability to relate with one another, to the people that we love. So have you seen that in your work? Have you seen childhood trauma being impactful into adulthood?
Definitely, and impacts people very differently, I must say. There are people going through life who are very successful in their work, say, and it's driven by their childhood scars, you know, proving to themselves, you know, I am good enough, I am loved. So you see, you know, I've got all these people kind of around me, especially entrepreneurs. Yeah, I've got people around me helping me to build my empire. I must be loved, you know. There are people who may buy their way into gaining affection too. There are people who are involved in risky behavior, but there are people who actually do really good stuff from their childhood trauma, and that's for them is part of their recovery. But as you mentioned before, in order to kind of be your authentic self, you need to kind of address some of the adversities that you have experienced, and not to kind of suppress them. They're a very important part of you. Eventually they will become beauty scars, okay? Because we can see in the public eye, there are many people who've done great work who have come from traumatic backgrounds, right? So eventually they do go through a stage where they do go through a recovery. It doesn't go away, and that's the whole point, is that sometimes the process is a long road, but it's important to integrate your journey. Even though it's an unkind and an unfortunate journey, it needs to be integrated so you can create harmony and peace with your memories. To suppress their meaning, suppressing who you are, you know, how genuine you are, because most of the responses, what I find is that some people respond from their childhood wounds. So, for instance, they may be quite avoidant in their relationships, or they may kind of become people pleasers, you know, because they feel that they are not going to be wanted if they just be themselves. There are a lot of insecurities that come from childhood wounds. But it's very important to understand is that they can become beauty scars if you get the right support. And that's what I do with my work. And a part of my work is around neurodiversity as well, and how vulnerable you can be when you are neurodiverse. It can lead you to experience traumatic experiences. And when I talk about neurodiverse, I'm talking about people with ADHD, say, who are on an autism spectrum. But those people, because, you know, sometimes they feel that they may not get things right all the time, you know, socially they may find themselves slightly awkward. It puts a lot of pressure on, especially academic work, relationships, behavior. It puts a lot of pressure on parenting. And so the parenting may not always be the best kind of in parenting, because parents are quite stressed out with the obviously the parenting of a child who's neurodivergent, who see the world very differently and don't know how to deal with it themselves. And so that can lead them to be quite vulnerable from the parenting that's not really the best parenting for a child who's neurodiverse. But also it leads people with neurodiverse into very vulnerable situations like risk taking and people pleasing, because they find gaining friendships quite difficult. So they kind of overcompensate in that area, or because of the symptoms they're experiencing from their neurodiversity. Sometimes they may go into numbing, self-soothing, where it's illegal kind of substances and stuff like that. So, so that's some of the work that I deal with. So it's kind of bringing them through kind of like mindfulness meditation helps, ADHD or autism spectrum coaching as well helps, as well as looking at what led to the vulnerabilities and, what are the symptoms they're dealing with, not only from the neurodiversity symptoms that they're finding quite challenging, but also the trauma symptoms as a result of their experiences of being vulnerable.
Forgive me for not understanding, but I've heard you use the word, you're saying neurodiversity?
Yeah,
is that right?
Yeah, well, yes, neurodiverse, or neurodivergent. Those are people who have ADHD, who are autism spectrum. Yeah, their brains. Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, very good.
They see the world differently.
So let's get into a little bit of the specifics without making this a real long episode. So what types of therapy do you do with your clients? Do you encourage them to meditate? What are there some techniques that you use with your clients to help bring them more wholeness into their lives?
Yeah, and I will advise anyone to do this, really. Mindfulness meditation, taking time to kind of balance yourself again. If you're rushing around, if thoughts coming racing through your mind, you become overwhelmed, you become stuck, I would say use the method called STOP. So it's stop, take a breath. So for me, mindful meditation helps. So breathe in 4, breathe out 4. You can breathe in 4, breathe out 5. But if you do it, repeat that and kind of find a space.
5 seconds, that is.
Yeah.
In 4 seconds, out 5 seconds.
Correct. People say 4, whatever you find the rhythm of, right? Because you want, some people need to take longer breaths in, okay?
Yeah.
And just find a quiet space. Obviously, then you kind of observe, give you an opportunity to observe what's happening. So inside, what's coming up for you, and where is it located? Where are you feeling some of the stress of your feelings? And then look around you. What's you seeing outside of this? And pause as you proceed. What's your next step? And don't rush into things. Sometimes you need to say, right, I need to take a moment. So take, for instance, you're in an environment. Someone says something, and it's really triggered you. I say use the stop method, and that buys you some time. And you can say, look, I just need to take a moment. I'll come back to you with this.
Yeah. And process things.
Absolutely. Give yourself time. Yeah. Don't feel rushed that you need to experience something that you can't think. Well, what I'm trying to say is that don't experience something that you can't take back, or you thought, oh God, I wish I hadn't done that. We've all been there, right?
Been there, done that.
I think, we just need to be gracious, say I need to take a moment. It's okay. I rather say take a moment than say something that you just kind of, I wish I hadn't said that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very good. Well, I'll make this resource available in the show notes page, but I've got a method that I put together. It's called the ABCDE method of dealing with these activating events.
Right.
And A stands for the activating event, something that pushes your buttons, right? Something that you react to, and you know you're overreacting. You know that this, just sends your emotions into a whirlwind when this happens. So that's the activating event. And then B stands for the beliefs or the self-talk that surrounds that activating event. What do you say to yourself when this happens? And then C would be the consequences of continuing to believe that way. If I continue on this path, where's that going to take me? How's that going to impact my relationships with my kids? How's that going to impact my relationship with my wife or my boss at work or my subordinates at work? That's also very insightful. And then D is disputing that self-talk and saying, is there a better way? Can I react to this a little? Can I respond rather than react to these events a little bit better in a more healthy fashion? And then E stands for enjoying the energy shift of having a more healthy, productive response, thoughtful response to these events. And it's going to feel a little awkward at first. So I put together a one-page PDF. It's pretty quick. I made it one page by design, so it'd be simple. And it's a good way. There's something very, very powerful about writing this stuff down. When it's just in your head, it's kind of nebulous. It's kind of hard to put a handle on it sometimes.
Definitely.
But if you can write it down, you experience that kinesthetic aspect of writing, and especially if you're a kinesthetic learner, and then reading it out loud and hearing it yourself, some of that self-talk that's been going on in your mind, maybe for decades. Now all of a sudden you're speaking it out loud. It could be very impactful. To do it that way. So that's what I recommend people do. And we've been working with people in our marriage groups for the last 11 years. And people have used this and put it to good use. It's a very, very powerful tool. I'll make it available in the show notes.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that with me. I will use it myself.
Okay, please do. All right. So,
but journaling is very important. Yeah, I do. Yes. There's part of my book that says, let the reflection I see be me. And it's all about journaling and using that as a marker, really, to mark your journey. We don't get opportunity to look back on all the wonderful things that we've been doing. And so journaling is something.
Yeah, very good. So once again, what's the name of your book?
The 5-Step Challenge to Understanding Your Crazy Over 40s Life.
Very good. And your podcast?
Yes, the Crazy Over 40s Life. Yes, it's available on all platforms. And my coaching is for the over 40s life. I mean, I am in private practice for more kind of the trauma work and stuff like that. But this is for the over 40s. So my over 40s coaching deals with everything over 40s.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what's the best way to get a hold of you, Caroline?
Well, I'm on all the social media for my ills. It's Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Yeah, so I'm on all. Just look for the Crazy Over 40s Life and I'm there.
That's your handle on all of them?
Yes, it is. Yes.
All right, very good.
Yes.
All right. Caroline, if you could sum up the most important part of the conversation we had today, what would it be?
Well, at this moment, I would like to take something from my book that I like to.
Oh, that's great. Please do.
Yeah, I like to read out for all of you here. So here we go.
That's great.
So,
and I do the same thing once in a while. I wrote a 325-page book, The Christian's Guide to Holistic Health. But, it was probably over 5 years ago, and I don't remember every word I wrote.
Well, I don't. Well, I'm going through the menopause. I don't know what happened 10 minutes ago. Honestly, I'm perimenopause, actually. I mean, too much information, I'm sure, for my listeners, listeners. But anyway, one must embrace the authenticity of oneself. So that's what I've just shared with you. Okay, so like I said, words are made to feed your soul. And so like food, be particularly generous and thoughtful about the words you choose to feed yourself each day and each moment.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
That's really good. That's a great place to end, I think. Thank you, Caroline. I appreciate you sharing your time today.
Oh, I appreciate you having me on, David. Thank you. Take care, listeners.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
For more, go to the show notes page at davidsandstrom.com/113. There you can find an audio as well as a video version of the podcast. And this episode's content upgrade is the ABCDE method for identifying and correcting unhealthy thinking patterns. I'll highly encourage you to go and download yourself a free copy. It's well worth the time. If you're enjoying the show, I sure would appreciate you telling somebody about it. Health and wellness from a faith-based perspective is relatively hard to find. And if you're enjoying the show, you may have a friend that would enjoy it as well. So I would appreciate you sharing it with them. I think they'll thank you too. That's it for now. I'll talk with you next time. Be blessed.